Jod, I'll let him in. Mariah, I still think I might say your name wrong. I apologize in advance.
Thanks for practicing. I think you got it.
You just have to think of Christmas and then you'll remember.
That's I was going to put. I was worried who else can see our document. I was going to put some kind of phonetic spelling and clue to myself. Hi, Jod.
Hello.
Nice
How
to
are
meet
you?
you.
Hey, hi, John. How you doing?
Yeah, we
Hey,
haven't. I know you guys know each other somehow. We haven't spoke before, but nice to have you being part of the issue finally.
thank you. My pleasure. Such a joy.
Are you coming from the West Coast in the US?
I am, yes. California. Yes.
As far away as far away from the crap that's happening in the other side of your country.
I can't even keep up with it these days.
Okay, Krisztian and Marcy are still missing. Jod, are you all okay with your role here? I mean, I guess you've seen the agenda a little bit. I'm gonna do some housekeeping type of things, and then I'm gonna hand it to you to do your little intro we emailed about, and
Yeah.
then if you give it back to me, I will go on to introduce Andy, then Amy.
Yeah.
Marcy,
That's what
then
that's what I'm prepared for. Yep.
Okay. We can also chat to each other in the Zoom chat if we need to. These things are quite, maybe you've all seen them before. They're quite casual. As much as I like being prepared with this, it's not super formalized or stilted. Okay, here's Krisztian.
Hello.
Hi, Krisztian. Welcome.
Hey, Jess. Sorry for being late a little bit.
No, no worries. We're all good. You have a kind of easy role, Krisztian. As you know, you can participate in the roundtable after the author talks, but you don't have a real specific speaking role. Jod, do you have some questions, by the way, that you're going to prompt people with, or are you just going to leave it and see how you?
I thought that I wasn't prepared for that. I was just gonna say my intro and hand it back to you, but certainly open to being ad hoc as well.
So
But,
after the four talks, after Mariah's, then we have our own roundtable discussion. If you have questions, I mean, it counts for all of us, actually. Krisztian, yourself, I don't see, we're missing one other editor in here, aren't we? You're welcome just to throw questions either at specific people, authors, or at the collection of authors that have spoken, and see who wants to respond. So sometimes I take some notes while I'm listening to the talks for questions.
yes, I will do that.
Okay, so we've got both our editors, but we're still missing Morrissey as a speaker. He's on Brazilian timekeeping, I think. Arlene, are you all good?
Yes, I'm good.
Okay, thank you, by the way, for putting the bios in the document. I was going to copy paste them and I see you did it.
Yes.
It's only 3 people in the waiting room, but we had how many? 120 signups?
Yeah, 128
Wow.
signups.
Can I just check a thing?
Yeah.
Does that still sound all right to you, or does it sound like I'm getting kind of clipped off a bit?
Speak a little more.
Hello, my name's Andy Plain. Service design. Can act and should act.
It's a little crackly, but it's nothing big. But
Yeah, no, I know. I think I know what it is.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll get rid of that. Is that better? That's probably better. That's a bit crisper now.
Okay.
All right.
Oh, I see someone I know in the meeting room. That's always funny. Well, we might, if Morrissey isn't there, then we will skip in. He's only the third speaker, so if he shows up late, we'll put him in there. And Carolina, when we let everyone in, can you then turn off the waiting room to avoid all the beeping?
Yes.
Thanks. Six people in the waiting room. We have more speakers than we have an audience now.
Well, people normally arrive late.
I think people will come in late. Okay, let's you can let people in and turn off the waiting room, and I'm gonna speak a little bit and then kind of kick things off. Hello, everyone. Welcome to what has been what's the latest in a long string of our Touchpoint roundtables. I'm really pleased to do these events so that we can bring some kind of interactivity to what is a print publication. And this issue has been one that I've been really keen on publishing, and I'm very, very happy that it came out last week. So these Touchpoint roundtables are an opportunity for us to bring content to the issue to yourselves in the audience. We have a selection of guest editors that made the issue possible today, as well as authors. You'll be hearing from 4 of them. Before we get started, just a few kind of housekeeping. As you just heard, we're going to record this event. So if you're speaking or you're visible on camera, you will be on the recording, and that recording will be made available to the SDN community later. So just to let you know. So this issue it's on product management, service design. This is something that was close to my heart for a long time. I had been working with a product manager back in 2016 in Amsterdam, where I first started to see how they operate, and they knew what service design was. They were actually how I had gotten that job. But ever since then, I've watched as product management kind of has this separate track to service design, doing a lot of the things that we do with different approaches, sometimes conflicting, sometimes harmonizing quite well. And I wrote about this a little bit more in the editor's letter. It's something that I'm really pleased that as a community now we can speak about. And I would say several years ago, we wouldn't have selected this as an issue, as a topic. I thought it would be too niche, but we've gone ahead. We got a wonderful number of responses when we announced this issue. And I think it's led to a really great set of articles. So kicking things off, I'd like to let you know about 2 of the guest editors that are in the room. Someone has their mic on, please. If you've got a mic, please put it on mute. There are Krisztian Lomandi was one of the guest editors. There were 3, by the way, but we've only got 2 here today. He's a lead behavioral architect and team lead at Cowrie Consulting, specializing in combining behavioral science and strategic design to create customer employee experiences that acquire, grow, and retain customers for global clients. Jod Kaftan is head of product and design and research at Oracle, where he seeks to provide software as a service solutions that deliver enduring value for the global energy and construction sectors. Jod actually does have a role here. He's going to begin us off by sharing his thoughts on this overlap between service design and product management. Then I'll come back and I'll introduce the 4 speakers. With 3 when we started. I hope the 4th has shown up. The speakers that are going to be presenting to you. After that, there's going to be a discussion amongst the roundtable, that is the editors and the authors that are here. And then, of course, I want to make this interactive. All of you in the audience, please think of any questions that you have triggered by the 4 talks that you're going to see and the discussion afterwards, and put them in the Zoom chat. I'm going to pick out some of those questions because at the very end of our time together, I will pose them back to the roundtable, to the authors and editors that spoke. I think that's enough for me. Hopefully I didn't forget anything important. Jod, I'll hand it over to you to share your thoughts on the issue and the topic itself.
Okay, thank you, Jesse. Look, as a designer and someone who's been once a product manager, I was deeply invested in this issue of touch points. After spending 10 years as a consultant at places like WPP and Accenture, I returned to the enterprise so I could gain deeper experience on how to practice design and innovation at scale in a dedicated industry space with mature products. And I wanted to get messy and even political. As Alvin Toffler says, all preferred futures are political. And in consulting, it's rare to work with product managers. So in the 4 years since I've returned to the enterprise, I've really grown to appreciate product management as an extraordinary practice. The best product managers are multidisciplinary. They're passionate about making great products and accountable to a business value. They're also obsessed generalists, like most good designers I know. I've learned that an exceptional partnership in service design and product management can really transcend any political barrier. And this partnership can not only lead to really world-class products and services, but when high performing, the two disciplines can create a kind of human-centered counterculture that provides positive friction to the reflexive, agile practices that dominate the industry and which often prioritize speed to market over speed to impact. And so I look forward to hearing Andy speak more about this in a moment. And today, the disciplines are at an interesting inflection point, I think, in the age of AI and increasing ambiguity. On LinkedIn, I frequently see headlines around the death of design and product management. And yet, as someone who's working in SaaS, I see the opposite. I see two disciplines that are actually thriving and moving closer to each other as bedfellows. Service design, with its aptitude for harnessing complexity into living systems, can influence roadmaps by stepping in to address the complex challenges that are often revealed through product management's multidisciplinary efforts. And PMs are often constrained by revenue linearity as they face the inexorable tension between near-term and long-term with their products. And so I'm excited to hear more, Maria speak more about this as well. I also look forward to Amy speaking to her piece that addresses how products and services have a shared goal of delivering value, especially when we know customers perceive a singular cohesive experience, which often leads to universal definitions of products and services that as problematic challenges internally. When you enlist product management, service design, and design research into a unified framework in service of the customer experience, you can really orchestrate the disciplines in such a way that you can surmount some of this organizational inertia. And that often hampers service design's customer-centric orientation. And Morrissey will expand on this as well. Now, as for some of the pieces I had the privilege to edit, I think a prevailing theme is that multidisciplinary invention and harmony can unlock transformation, whether in SaaS platforms, public services, science fiction, or future-focused service ecosystems. Ultimately, service design is framed in this issue as a necessary balance to product-led organizations move fast and break things ethos. And by promoting some slower or more deliberate strategies aimed at repairing broken systems, service design serves as a metamorphic force that encourages organizations to embrace these diverse disciplines and the diverse perspectives that come along with it, and avoid stagnation with some of these harmful practices that are very siloed. The highest compliment I can give, Jesse, is to anyone, is that I learned from you. And that's exactly what I can say to every author in this issue. It was just truly a pleasure to participate with the production of this issue. And with that, I'll hand it back to you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jod. I should also say this is the first time for this event that we're restreaming it to other platforms. If you're watching us there, I realize I've been asking you or giving the opportunity to ask questions. Unfortunately, I don't think there's a way of me seeing those, and maybe hopefully there's not a way for you to be typing them there. The people who are in Zoom, is where we'll be seeing the chat from. If you have a burning question and you're watching it on Restream on LinkedIn or something like that, please try to join us on Zoom and put your question in the chat. So let's get on to our first talk. This is going to be from Andy. And I've got the pleasure of now twice having Andy in a course that I'm teaching through the SDN Academy. And he is a design leadership coach, co-lead of the Masters of Service Design at the Hochschule in Lucerne, and co-author of Service Design from Insight to Implementation. So Andy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thanks. I shall start sharing. And someone scream if it's not coming out. But I think I can see it there. So the origin story of this is that we had started kind of thinking, well, we're actually working on our the second edition of this book, and just turned in the draft of it actually, so it's sort of in production at the moment. And so this is Ben, Lavrans, and I, well, Ben, myself, and Lavrans in that order in the photo. About 12, 13 years ago, when we actually were writing the book the first time around. And this time around, of course, we started to think, well, what should we do in a second edition? And the obvious thing is looking back on, where are we now? What has changed? And one of the things is, of course, has been the rise of product design. And the rise of product design, but also product management and product as a kind of discipline. And so, there's been this meteoric rise in the last 10 years. It's been a very hot industry. It's been a very hot kind of discipline. It's been where all the money has been, and that always makes it kind of very hot. And it attracts a lot of people to it, which is both good and bad, because you also get a lot of, down the bottom end of it, you get a lot of people who kind of aren't that experienced. And so, product depends how I know Mariah's going to talk about this having a longer legacy, but really product as we know it now has had a kind of history that it's not that old, right? It's about 15, 16, 17 years old, depending on how you kind of think about it. And what has happened with that is, it's improved efficiencies in several organizations. It's allowed those organizations to I think it's been very successful in talking the language of large organizations and and I think that's a problem too. But in terms of, it's been successful in kind of pushing a way of working that has actually made a lot of differences positively, right? So I'm going to be talking a bit negatively about it later, but I'm really talking about the kind of suboptimal environments that the product has been in when I'm talking about that. And I think it's quite important that we're clear about that. One of the problems with it, though, is it is kind of introduced silos. So the rise of product has often ended up in quite a siloed command and control structure all over again, where strategy becomes disconnected from a delivery that is kind of focused on widgets, features, throughput. And that's often pushed design back down onto the assembly line. And designers, all flavors of design, but especially service design, for a long time, for like 20 years, we're trying to become more strategic. And then, product design glommed all of these different disciplines of design under one umbrella. And it's kind of pushed it back down to the assembly line. And so you get these feature squads, you get the kind of language around that, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And that's problematic because all of these things, as some examples, they are not products, right? These are all services. And when we use the shorthand of product in a digital context, it masks a lie. These are platforms and their service ecosystems. Try using them when their servers are down or when you're offline, right? Unless you've got any downloaded content on Netflix. And that's how you know. It's one of the reasons, ways you know. But there's a whole kind of service infrastructure behind that that are making these work. Stripe is very definitely a service. Airbnb is absolutely a service. I argue that all the rest are too, right? And, in some respects, who cares, right? Why are you just banging on about that? 10 years ago, Andy, you were saying all products are services. Still believe that. And now you're kind of just upset that product design has kind of taken precedent. And the reason why it matters is because words create worlds, as Abraham Heschel said. Semantics matter because the language we use sets up our mental model of how the world is or should be and our terms of references, right? And in particular, as you're seeing most dramatically in the USA at the moment, the language we use, and it makes a difference to who is included and who is excluded, and who should be included or excluded, and what should be excluded and included, and the way we think about our products and services. And this can be really damaging. So, in the political context, a prisoner of war, or are you a prisoner of war, or are you an enemy combatant? And the difference there is, a prisoner of war is afforded the rights of the Geneva Convention, and an enemy combatant isn't. That's why they ended up in Guantanamo Bay. Are you an asylum seeker, or an illegal immigrant, activist, or terrorist? Now, in our context that we're talking about, I have over and over again in my coaching, I talk about this because there's this very banal thing that by dint of your title, you get invited to certain meetings or not. Literally, you're on their invite to a meeting or not, where discussions are had and decisions get made. And then you get that whole kind of thing around who owns what and all those things, which I think is problematic anyway. But that's a real issue because it starts to kind of break down communications. And when communications break down and groups of people are operating in silos and they're just kind of passing stuff off, and particularly in that kind of cascading, but it's not necessarily waterfall, but it's very much about kind of just there's someone who decides something here, and then it moves on as it moves down to and down to delivery and execution. You end up with this thing where services created in silos are experienced in bits. And this is a phrase from the book, quote from the book, and I still really stand by this. You see it over and over again, and we experience it over and over again. I think the other thing to look at is the changing role of design. So I wrote this piece about mediocrity in response to all the kind of design is dead stuff. I actually think the design project has been a success. But one of the things that there was this sort of utopianism, and I think particularly in service design, was that we were going to kind of radically change the world. Change all these industrial-minded organizations into service-minded ones. You've seen some, real success, things like Gov.uk and the kind of anti-pattern of the US in the moment, where you can see how if you dismantle services and do the opposite of what we're all trying to do, which is sort of make them glue them together, you can cause deliberate harm. But I think we underestimated just how happy some organizations are with mediocrity. And it used to kind of really irritate me, because I used to think, well, this is just this move fast and break things. It's like the equivalent of fast fashion. And then I realized that, I went and bought a T-shirt from H&M. And I kind of thought, well, do you know what? I'm quite happy with mediocrity quite a lot of the time. And although we might feel that, our job is to make these bespoke, lovely things, I think part of what we are facing is with the kind of agile and lean stuff that some people are going to talk about, or that Jod was just talking about before, is this, the focus on speed means you actually end up heading towards the age of average. If anyone knows Alex Murrell's essay, it's really, really good. Google it online. It talks about how all these different forces, and it's not just algorithms, but there's a kind of feedback loop there, but it's also a kind of human algorithms of what we tend to kind of think is, oh, that's a good thing. Whether it is all cars looking the same, that's the kind of wind tunnel effect, whether he talks about the international Airbnb style, and here all coffee shops looking the same, right down to what he calls Instagram face, thanks to Kim Kardashian, where we all end up with this thing where we all use the same process, we all use the same approach, we all use the same mentality, and everyone's going too fast to really spend some time to think of anything else. You end up in the age of average. And one of the things that I remember happening all the time, there was a quote attributed to John Maeder, which was, Adobe is the world's art director, when Adobe was the king of things. Because when people are working fast, what they do is they rely on whatever the tools they use do easily. And when you're working fast and there's a process or a framework in place, and then everyone leans into that and you kind of stop thinking. And that's my kind of biggest issue with AI, or it's my second biggest issue with AI, apart from resource usage, is that kind of tendency for everything to go into the middle and create a kind of mediocrity. And at the same time, nobody really cares about it either. And I think that's really kind of problematic. And so the argument in our article is this that rather than service design kind of reconfiguring itself to be kind of like product, or kind of productize itself, that in fact, one of the things we do is we bring that strength there, that we have this systems and ecosystems thinking, We're looking for those consistencies of coherency across all those different touch points. We're thinking front stage and backstage, and that we should advocate for that in the organization, and we should be a counter-cultural voice, because I think that's really, really important to avoid the age of average and also to avoid harm. So that's my little rant. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Andy. Okay, we'll get on to the next talk. Again, as I said in the chat, if you've got questions, please put them in the Zoom chat and I'll assemble them and pose them at the end of the session. So we're going to move on to Amy Lynch, who is a senior service designer at the Bank of England. She has a background in leading service design and digital products for complex services and products in various industries, including regulation, housing, food, and finance.
Hi, everybody. Let me check. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sounds good.
Amazing. Let me share this. And can you see that screen okay? Fantastic. That works great. Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. So interesting to hear the story so far and really resonate with some of the things you just said there, Andy. So we're going to focus on our talk. Sorry, I can't see my slides for some reason. Is that moving or not? Is it not moving? No. Okay, hold on. Sorry, I've got some security issues over here, but I think, is it moving now?
It is, yes.
Okay, amazing. Sorry about that, everybody. Okay, so I imagine all of us that have been practitioners for any amount of time are used to having any amount of these questions being asked to us by stakeholders, or shall we say humans, that we come across in our day-to-day work around what is the definition of products and services, what does it mean? And it really impacts, like Andy said, how things manifest themselves truly in organisations. So it is important, and it is something that we need to think about. One thing I think that we do agree on in product and service worlds is that we're both trying to deliver value. So that is something I feel that, especially in the research that we did for this article, everybody had the same thing around. Essentially, products and services are both trying to deliver value. Sorry that I keep having to look over there. Okay, so how do we define a product or a service? Like I say, this is the question that seems to be coming up again and again, especially in the conversations that we've been having recently. And I think we've all found it's a little bit more complicated than that. So we've already heard today about how people have different ideas, preferences, perceptions about this. In our research, we had a range of views from around 20 different individuals. Andy, I know we also had Jonathan, who's on the call, I believe, had a bit of a chat with you about this too. But what was really, really interesting about this is it was such a striking variance in the responses that we got, and they were really different depending on people's career history, what kind of job titles they had, what kind of educational backgrounds they had. And so we hypothesize actually that the definitions, the kind of internal definitions that people have around these things and the perceptions that they have are framed by a number of different things. So I'm just going to go through some of those. So organizational structures and experiences shaping perceptions. So if you're in a service-led organization, for example, you might have a different experience than somebody who is in a product-led organization, which we've seen become more and more prevalent, versus a functional, more traditional organizational structure, and then a hybrid. So we feel that we hypothesize that essentially people have different perceptions based on their experience within those structures. Or educational experiences or framework exposures too. So for example, if somebody's trained in ITIL, ITIL provides a service definition. If they're in GDS or have exposure to GDS frameworks, there's a GDS definition for service. Whereas something like Prince2, which is a project management methodology, doesn't define a service. But if we go over to product, ITIL also defines what a product is. GDS, I couldn't find one in any of the documentation. It's not to say there isn't one somewhere. And Prince2 had a definition. So you can also see how the weighting might change depending on those education or framework exposures people might have had. And then career routes. So if we think about different, the T and I shape, so somebody with a broad skill set versus someone with a more focused skill set, I think in our sector, there are a lot of people who might have had squiggly careers over time in UX or adjacent. So somebody who's had varied roles in varied sectors might have a different perception, for example, than someone who has had similar roles in varied sectors, or somebody who has had similar roles in similar sectors. So that might also frame and shape the perception that people have around what is a product, what is a service. Oh, that's gone too far for some reason. So what we found, sorry, bear with me a moment. What we found is that we didn't find consistent definitions when we were speaking to all of these different people who had different, were in different roles in different sectors, etc. But we did find that people do sort of lean one way or another towards common models or mental models that they have in their minds. And this might be framed somewhat by the organisation that they're currently in, all of those factors that we mentioned prior. So I'm just going to cover off some of those models that we came across. And it's not to say that these are correct in any way. I think so far these have inspired a lot of discussion, a lot of debate, and everybody kind of has their own, like I say, internal interpretation of these and how it manifests in your own mind. But the first one reflects an integrated product and service ecosystem. So thinking back to Andy's examples of, say, Netflix or something like that, where there might be an application and then there's service wrappers around it. Or if you think about maybe, for example, something like Apple, where you might have different subscriptions based on your needs, but you don't have to have the subscriptions. You don't have to have an Apple Watch. You can still have an Apple iPhone. There's an ecosystem of things that may or may not overlap to provide value. So that was one of the examples that we heard. Another example that we heard is more around service-led structures. So that's something like, for example, a housing provider who perhaps without the, if somebody's not living in a house provided by a housing provider, they're not likely to need the repair service provided by that housing provider. And so that's a service wrapper wrapping around maybe a product. And there's different examples of this kind of thing. But essentially, the product is not the product is not likely to exist of its own accord. It needs that service wrapper around it to be supported. And then our third model was around products and services that are delivering value, but might not necessarily be. So an organization that delivers a product and delivers a service, maybe they're not even in the same industry or sector, but they're independent of each other, essentially. So you don't necessarily have to have integrated teams that work together to deliver these things. They might be very siloed, and that might be fine because they don't overlap. And then another one, which is a really interesting concept, is that a organization can determine a product or service and organize themselves around that, deliver it how they like, using their own methodologies. But essentially, the user will perceive whether it's a product or a service and the value that they get out of it. So the organization, to some extent, has lost some control around the perception of the products and services. And then finally, a similar kind of model here we have, which is around a journey-orientated one. So if we think about something like the NHS, where people might move between different services, using different products along the way in a more journey-orientated way. And I think you might be looking at these and thinking, well, some of these actually are one and the same, or they overlap. And I think that's true. I think these different models, although they are distinct, they can also coexist at the same time. So what we have suggested, and certainly what we're doing in our organisation, is actually agreeing an internal definition, thinking about these models, thinking about the way that we're organised, thinking about the way that we deliver value, and then trying to come up with definitions that we can use for our own teams and our sort of technology and our product management teams as well, to at least agree internally in lieu of not being able to come across with a universal definition. And then hopefully we ultimately can bring product and service together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy. Okay, now the next talk is going to be from Mercy, and I've seen he did arrive, so I'm trusting you're here and you're ready to go. Mercy is a CS expert at ING in the Netherlands, I believe. He's working in Amsterdam, where I live, and I've probably been in the same building because I've worked for ING as well. He comes from an academic career and has a PhD in service design from the Oslo School of Architecture and Design, and has worked as an assistant professor at the University of Twente from 2017 until 2022.
forgive me, I have a little bit of trouble. I don't know how to share screen without losing the screen, which is a beautiful thing. So I might have to fall out to these old ways. Forgive me for that.
No.
But you get to see the beautiful PowerPoint user interface. Um, hi. Is that okay? I hope that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to minimize the rest of the stuff, but we can read your slide quite well anyway.
Because if I do like this, then I don't see anything. I lose, and then you get this screen. I'm not even sure what's happening. You know, that's
No
a
worries.
little.
Go
Okay.
as you are. Okay.
But I mean, like my slide skills are not impressive, anyways. What was really was kind of very interesting to hear what the other colleagues were talking about, and well, I took a very I come from academia, like, and I took almost ironically quite pragmatic perspective. I have a colleague and he used to say, nobody cares if it's service design. Nobody cares about what the hell the discipline you are doing is about what you're trying to reach. And I work in the CX department, and people say, "Oh, it's about the cost, it's about this, about that." No, it's about profit. Company wants and they need that. They need it to actually keep the wheel moving, and CX comes here because it creates value for the organization. And I think that acknowledging that, the other day I said I saw someone post on LinkedIn that was the organization pays your salary, not the customers, although this can be a contentious topic, and I don't want to delve too much into that. It is a little bit about looking on the pragmatic perspective, because me myself having this discussion with my colleague who is quite accomplished consultant, and he's like, well, like it's about helping organizations deliver better value for the customers. That's what you help them create value. And sometimes I took much of a service design perspective as a discipline, and in reality, when you look at it, it's like, okay, it's really nice. We can actually think about structured journeys. Everything's beautifully orchestrated, and try that. Been there. Actually, my work usually came on brand experience. So how can we align the service design around delivery this aligned experience? But once I started working in this organization, it's quite a big bang. My dream shattered a little bit because it's all very fragmented, and I think a little bit I think it was Andy that posted this solutions built in silos are experienced in bits, and I say that about and I noticed that in our circumstances it's quite a reality. I think also in product they talk about, if I'm not wrong, the Conway law, right? The experience you have is actually quite a reflection of your internal processes. And when I look at the organization, what I see is service design, and I really like the work of Lucy Kimball when she talks about silent designers, right? Most of the services that we use, and services, they exist for a few centuries, really grew more recently as an economy sector as well. But if you look at service design, about 20 years discipline. So who was doing the services design before? And it was, well, managers, right? All sorts of managers, and they still do it. Most of the services we do are not designed by service designers, but by managers, people that are running the organization. And in our case, they are the pillars on which the bank sit. This create all sorts of issues. A feature-driven approach is quite a common thing, which is like someone created a roadmap at some point, they slice, they distribute it, and then someone has to do it. But then the KPI comes as, well, you have to deliver that. That is your job. And although you are always responsible for customer experience, you have, a rope in your neck, and they say, well, you have to deliver this as fast as possible. This is your KPI. And, I really like this sentence, what gets measured gets done, because it's very often interpreted the other way, right? People think that what you measure, you improve. No, it's the way you measure, you shape what is done. And that's what's happening here. And that's what I kind of like though about product management. It's like this acknowledgement. Well, we are here to create business value, right? We are here to deliver on the business goals and the product objectives, the business objectives. And then some people ask me, look, but Mauricio, where is the customer objectives here? It's like, well, it's in the product, because the product, well, at least in theory, we will only be successful delivering on the objectives. It is actually delivering for the customers. And in doing that, you actually get a mandate, right? So there is an objective. You have to deliver on that. You are no longer being responsible for delivering a piece of a feature that was in the roadmap, God knows for how long. You are responsible for delivering this impact. And it's almost ironic that this link to the business objective actually gives you the mandate to actually improve the customer experience. Because now you are being measured on the impact you are building on the customer experience. You're no longer there just to deliver that delivered check, you know. And in a sense, for me, especially, you can say, okay, this is product. The management, you can say that this is because of OKRs. For us, they came together. It really helps to create this move towards empowering the teams to look not only at what they have to deliver, but the impact of what their deliveries is. Then, of course, it's not a miracle, right? When you look at a lot of product management, and I came in through product management with the work of Kagan, like a lot of people. Product trios are not really there, right? Then you have the product team, like these people that own the backbone of the bank. They have received a mandate. You have to improve this, and then they have to do this thing that they are assigned to do. And well, there is no really design capacity because you have the QBRs and all those things. They start to do those things, and that's where a lot of those silent designs come from. There is no capacity to support them. They don't have actually the mandate to do a proper design process, although there are design frameworks that we call ours. So we nurture them, and just to be a little bit, well, some love, some hate. Some people think it's just taking a lot of my time because they have their KPIs. I have to deliver this thing. So that's a little bit on the challenge. And then I can't remember who said that. I think it was someone around Stickdorn group of colleagues, and it was like, if you have to do two things in service design, is research and prototyping. If you have to do one thing, is do research. And that's what I like. You get your goals very humble. Please, let's really focus on doing the research and ensuring that we create these solutions quite well built. These are very smart people. So let's, if you really have the mandate and the time to explore with the customers, then you can actually it's a little bit like about the dance of the chairs. We're trying to move resources around. So we don't ask the designers to come around later in the process to redo the process, but we do own the problem space quite well. And then when the designers come, they can really work on it because there is actually good research to do that. And in this way, you can actually start to possibly have a better development process. And then, of course, you go again into the challenge, which is slicing. That's what I kind of really liked about product is when service design ends and you move towards implementation, how are you actually going to do this breakup? So now I'm going to quite a big project, and then we have like, okay, this is how the journey should be. Again, back to Stickdorn, a journey is not anything deliverable. So slice between projects, then slice the releases, so we can move along. And then you start actually seeing, okay, there is actually something that you can do here. We can bring some service design key elements, let's say, understand the complexity, the overall view of the experience. But you can also take a lot from product management. It gives you a mandate, for the better, for the worse. The design tools really help you add this knowledge that you need. Service design has quite some powerful tools like service. I find it kind of interesting that journey management is growing so much now. And I remember my work on doing my PhD 10 years ago or more. People were already talking about journey mapping, but apparently it was rediscovered. And I still find that a lot of journey management, for me at least, the most interesting is about aligning the stakeholders in the silos more than the actual management aspect. But that's another story. And of course, the UX and design moment that you actually bring this idea, right? Because indeed a journey or very often it's a vision of how the solution should be. How can you actually start bringing this thing to life? So we started to draw a framework, and it was quite interesting because what we had to do was this started with a way of combining my COE, which is the COE CX, with the work of the COE design. And there's like, okay, we really have to actually also map the work of the product people, like product manager, owners, whatever you call them. It's like, okay, but then it's still incomplete. You also need to actually have the devs and the tech people. It's like, oh, by the way, you also need all this process and change agents that we have in the organization. And now what was supposed to be a very simple 2-column graphic is now a massive table. But you start to actually see the difference of what you have to do and onboarding all the stakeholders. When you have an organization like ING, it's massive. Like you have so much compliance, so much risk, so many different things to do, and so many processes. Oh, Jesus Christ, so many processes. And you actually need really to start with the right team. Because I say that from my own mistake. I started with a team and I thought that was the right team. And then in the middle of the process, especially as we start to move from the journey as a vision towards the implementation of this, because we failed to map some stakeholders, we are going on circles for 3 months trying to actually get the stakeholders and get them in place. So actually, if I would update this image here, and that's my own mistake because it's, for me, it's an ongoing process. That's why I took the challenge of writing this paper, was to reflect on it, is set your team for success. But also, you start with a mandate. I see far too many projects that start with someone finding something is wrong, but they don't have the actual support. So really start when you actually have the mandate to create this change. When you explore, and that's a little bit my rant towards product tends to be too hypothesis driven. And if you do that, you're gonna, in the best case scenario, you're gonna learn a lot about all the things you don't know, but you might never learn the things that you don't know. And if you do a proof process, you're just gonna go there with a massive bias just to validate what you want. And I hate the word validate because it implies, just checking it. Then again, breaking down the solution and slicing, again, different projects and different releases to bring this to the implementation, which leads us to essentially 3 key takeaways, which is, take something that you have a business support. There is still a business structure. This is where the money is. This is where the power is. This is how you get things done. There is things that are amazing, but you cannot do. It's better to do something that can actually see the light and create a positive impact than to try to keep pushing uphill something that will never see the day of light. Talk directly to the customer and not only about them. Sometimes I joke that people will do anything. They will read the coffee stains in a cup, not to talk to customers. It is sometimes a difficult issue to get people to really do this first-hand, deep qualitative exploration in organizations. There are so many layers of things in between the customer and the people that it gets very easy to hide behind. So much secondary data, so much kinds of surveys and everything that it's very easy to hide behind. And the third one is, again, back to this agile way of implementing, iterate towards your vision, make these slices and build your MVP to actually move forward. And, iterate your MVPs. Don't bring them to life and leave them to language, which is sometimes what you see more often than you wish. And that's when I stop. I don't know what sharing. Oh, here.
Thank you, Marcy. Okay, I know it's kind of quiet in the chat. Hopefully also editors, you're coming up with some good questions for our discussion. We've got the last speaker now. That's going to be Mariah Mills. She is a lead service designer at Harmonic Design and is passionate about guiding teams through design work while maintaining a positive and inclusive atmosphere. She organizes and hosts events with Harmonic to facilitate knowledge sharing and connections within the design community to grow our field and practice. Mariah, the floor is yours.
Yes. Let's see, pulling up my slide. All right. Great. Well, thank you so much. And excited to speak a little bit about my article. The kind of inciting question of my article was, can service design, product management, and journey management achieve greater outcomes together through collaboration, or are methods too divergent where our objectives and activities converge? And I really became interested in this topic as a service design lead for many years with Harmonic, and also as a part of our team at Harmonic developing our journey management consulting practice. And I've always found that in my work, I've had some very mutually valuable collaborations with product managers and product teams. And through that experience, I really believe that our methods, even though they are divergent in some ways, our unique strengths support each other's outcomes where there's, perhaps blind spots between these fields as well. So I really saw a potential there that I wanted to explore in this article. And I believe that we have, as fields, as disciplines, a lot of common values to build from. As Andy alluded to, I do see the legacy of the industrial product, like the industrial mode of production as a legacy in product management, as kind of maybe not sharing in all of these values I have listed on the screen, but the way that product management is evolving today, and thinking about the product operating model and things like that, seeing more and more emphasis on customer centricity, things of that nature, as well as service design and journey management also being very rooted in organizational strategy, business outcomes, these kind of things. So I think there is a lot of convergence in what we're all trying to do. However, as kind of, has been mentioned by others, product management is currently somewhat of a dominating force in organizational decision-making and work planning, something I've seen in my work. And in my article, I kind of discuss how this can sometimes cause some disjointed efforts. Speaking of blind spots, so even when product leaders are zooming out to look at the full product ecosystem, they don't necessarily always see the full scope of experience that their customers have with their offerings. In large organizations, there's almost always touch points and different service interactions that customers are experiencing that are outside of any one product experience. And if these interactions are neglected in our design efforts or designed on the basis of a single product experience, the overall journey experience and customer lifecycle isn't necessarily being seen and considered. And so that's where journey management really comes into excel. And that's in aligning those product experiences under this higher level framework of the overall customer lifecycle, and using that framework as a way to connect the top level strategy that's set by the business and the very high level objectives they're aiming for to product or macro journey level stages objectives, and then coming down, looking detailed into what are the metrics that are being collected to show whether or not progress is being made. And I do appreciate Marisha's point that what you measure is definitely, the information that you get back. And I think this is a very useful framework to ensure that what you are measuring connects all the way up through to what you're trying to do as an organization. As you get those metrics back, then you can better show how those design efforts that are taking place, whether it's through product changes or service changes, are then resulting in those business goals and the business impact that, of course, everybody's aiming for in this scenario. So this is what kind of brought me to explore a collaboration model between all three of these disciplines, regardless of the role that is practicing them in a company. So journey and product management, I'll start kind of up in the, this is designed as a cycle, but I'll start up in this corner. Journey and product management have different mindsets and lenses to point out what kinds of initiatives need to get prioritized and resources, and both are valuable. So one thing they both bring is a perspective on where there are new unmet needs and gaps, whether that's in the market or in an existing experience with a customer experience or an objective that is not getting met. And this is where service design plays a key role, helping organizations understand those unmet needs from outside in and align on how to address them in a holistic way. Back to front, from product changes to policy, process. We all know this. A lot of us are service designers here. Interaction changes that need to take place. And however, as I think one of the other speakers was bringing this up too, I've often been a part of service design North Star vision projects where the outputs, we develop a detailed path to evolve to this new vision and everything that needs to get done across the organization, but our stakeholders maybe have not thought through how do we connect this into the organization's work planning process and get this activated. And this is really part of what inspired me to develop a collaboration model for this, where the outputs of each activity is an input to another, not meant to be a waterfall process to walk through, but as you can see here, a lot of these moments are collaborative as well, so that these disciplines are informing each other in overlapping lenses rather than necessarily doing one part of a process and handing it off. But it highlights where each of these disciplines are best positioned to take the lead and where they can benefit greatly from dialogue and communication with others. So, of course, after work planning comes work management, and this is still largely in the hands of product teams. In this model, I believe it still makes sense to integrate into how organizations are currently working today in that manner. But also now we're looking at a little bit of a wider scope. You know, some of these are programs of work that would be best handled in other areas, operations, marketing, et cetera. And journey management, as I mentioned before, then excels in tracking progress and outcomes of those improvements and showing the business impact of those new initiatives. So this brings us back to the top of that cycle, where this information then can help inform business leaders, product teams, everybody invested in reaching these outcomes about new areas that might need attention, whether that's a design project, like something very complex, or something very straightforward that just needs to move into the work planning cycle. So this collaboration model can be enacted in organizations with different configurations of roles playing each part. I think this is where, it's important to think about meeting organizations where they're at and who's doing what, as long as those roles are skilled in that discipline and have the right mindset. But, I do think as far as, we're service designers as a North Star vision, to maintain the integrity of a model like this, it would be ideal to have an organizational structure with roles that support it. And again, I think of this as a North Star vision, not something that will be easy to go into an organization and say, you should do this, but we should have a vision for what this could look like. And I think there should be more work on this topic. I'm personally not an organizational designer, but have kind of a high-level model to start from here, showing that where company leaders are setting this high-level strategy, there might be roles like head of product working with a journey strategist to then work to set objectives and priorities for maybe the product ecosystem or the customer life cycle. How are we going to see this at a higher level? And then bringing that to product and journey managers who are overseeing maybe an individual product teams or segments of that life cycle. And there will have to be, again, collaboration and dialogue at these different levels to ensure those things interact and line up. But just to show that it's not the idea that a journey manager is now dictating down to product managers who run product teams, but that these are dialogues happening at different levels. And then finally, I believe service design has a role to play at each level, but the nature of the service design work and the gravity of the outputs are different depending on which level they're playing at. So that might look like innovation work, down to redesigning, reimagining what happens in the becoming a customer phase or segment of a journey, down to reimagining what a single product experience looks like. So that's how I can see this collaboration model playing out if we were to look at roles and a potential model for the future. But I think what's most important and what I took from this exploration is to encourage us to continue to look at how these disciplines collaborate with each other and can help each other, support each other through our own blind spots and play to our strengths. So, thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Maria. I've got actually a question to start off, and it was triggered really by one of your last slides, although it came into my head in the very beginning. And in fact, it first entered my head back in 2017. I wrote an article then about whether service designers should be in an agile environment, whether they should be in product teams, or whether that was kind of frustrating our capability to think holistically when we're placed just down in a product team and we don't see the big picture. So I'm heartened to see in your last slide a role for service design in the 3 or 4 locations you said there, down from kind of the operational stuff to the strategy things. I'm curious from all the authors also, or the editors, where do you feel that service designers are best positioned to work in a product organization? Or can they fully meet our mandate, our skills, our capabilities in product teams, or is that kind of limiting our scope? open it either to you, Mariah, or anyone else who spoke earlier.
Yeah, I feel like I just kind of spoke on that, so I am really interested to hear what others have to say as well.
It's interesting. We had I was discussing with a colleague from the design department, and that was a little bit the question: was should we become more product or define ourselves more as a product? And I would go back a little bit to what I said earlier, and which is does it really matter what you call in the end? I mean, I think that there is some, of course, elements of being able to and understand the whole of the solution and bring it to life. But I don't know. I'm getting. I was more of a purist, like putting like trying to put a definition on the things. I'm as I work on an organization, I become less and less concerned about that, and more concerned about the practical outcome and the competences that you need. Not to say I do still talk to my colleagues and say, well, we do need someone with a service design capability. It does help to explain. And if we are talking about the general understanding of the disciplines, I think it goes on quite all levels, as you mentioned, Mariah, because it can be about envisioning the entire experience of the organization. What is an ING experience to give the organization that work, or what is a mortgage experience within the ING context? That would be again a service designer. Then to design the process of applying, let's say, for a mortgage, again a service designer bringing this vision to a more concrete aspect. But then I think that, and someone mentioned about this conversation between service and UX design, the challenge always becomes to me is when you have an organization like this, and if you're working inside the organization, is how do you ensure that this vision or these elements that you design as a service designer comes to life as it is designed to be, and it's not completely diluted and watered out into these multiple releases and into the endless quest for the tech to support and the resources to make it happen. And like sometimes these small things take two QBRs to be done. So who will be overseeing these things and ensuring that this comes to life? I'm not sure if I answered the question though.
Thanks, Andy. I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this question. I've been thinking about it quite a lot, actually. Thank you, Mariah, for your talk too. So one of the things is the Achilles heel of service design is that it has this Zoom level kind of thing going on where we deal in touch points and we think about that very detailed level and how it affects the whole ecosystem. And then we zoom all the way out to the whole ecosystem and the business and the organization. And it can seem like we want to control and do everything. Whereas actually that's more of a kind of mental thing. And I still come back to this idea that service design is less a particular role, certainly a kind of discipline, but less a particular role than it is an activity that a multidisciplinary group of people do. Now, in order for that to be the case, obviously everyone has to believe that's what they're doing. And if they believe they're creating products, then, and instead of services, that's where it kind of starts to fall apart. Service design I'm seeing being brought back in more often, I actually forgot to mention this, to sort of move slow and glue stuff back together, to work horizontally across service product teams and silos, to look at where are there inconsistencies. Some of my coaches are doing this, where they're brought in and they're looking at, how can we, literally sometimes it's features on an individual app, but often it's different touch points across an ecosystem of touch points of different apps and websites in digital that are inconsistent because those teams have worked separately. So part of their job is that mapping thing that most people will kind of know. And then a lot of it is actually kind of looking at if it's something that a user might move through from one state to the next, what are the on and off ramps between those different parts? So it's always the gaps and transitions, transitions over time or transitions across channels where stuff breaks, right? So where the cracks happen. And it happens because one group of people think that's their responsibility and another group of people think that's their responsibility. And there's this little bit in the middle that each side assumes is the other side's responsibility and it doesn't get done. And there's no kind of overlap there. So that, I think service design has a really good role to play in that kind of horizontal way across the organization. The real problem is who do they report to and where do they sit? And all the organizational structure stuff gets in the way, right? Because do they report to the head of product? Maybe, but kind of not really, doesn't actually make sense. Do they report to someone higher? Well, then you get into this whole kind of power struggle thing. And, you know, to Maurice's point there, language does matter. I've talked about it right at the beginning of my talk, and I wasn't sure if you're there, simply because it often defines who is in power, who makes decisions and who does not, and who's included in those or not. And I think it's kind of quite important to get that clear. When it works well, then yes, it doesn't sort of really matter. People's roles and disciplines doesn't matter. If you zoom out or abstract it really, the best projects I've ever worked on, it's just been a group of people in a room or, you know, virtually trying to solve a problem together. And it doesn't matter if they're the client, doesn't matter if they're someone senior, doesn't matter if they're someone junior or what discipline they come from. Ultimately, that's really what you're doing. And I think it's quite important to remember that's actually what's going on. And all the other stuff like, you know, roles and processes and frameworks and organization structure and stuff, they're actually sort of artificial things we put on top of that. And I think you mentioned actually the relationships between people and how you navigate those relationships is 98% of the work. And you know, I think this is one of the things that initially got left out of service design as a kind of certainly teaching it, as someone who's been teaching it for a long time, is this fact that actually a large part of the work is the people stuff and the methody stuff and the frameworks and all that stuff. You know, it is, you can teach that some stuff quite quickly, but the actual orchestration of an alignment of all those people is a really, really hard part of the job, and it's definitely part of the job.
Great. Amy, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you. I think I mirror some of what Andy said there. For me, service designers can be strategic at all levels. So you can be strategic from the bottom up or the top down. And I think there is the utopian way that we get to play, and then there's the reality of the way that we get to play. And the reality of the way that we get to play, as Andy said, is sometimes unpicking things, gluing things together that already exist. It's very rare we get a blank sheet of paper to go in and do something truly end-to-end strategic. We're always going to be leveling in different parts of Zoom across different products and services. So I think the thing that we have to do is just be prepared to add value in different places, and that is how we are strategic in the way that we deliver. So yeah, I don't think the utopian type of service design exists often, in my opinion.
Jod, would you like to jump in?
Sure. Just speaking from a personal case study, you know, where I work, and you know, our SVP who oversees the business unit had asked for you know, essentially a service design project without knowing it was service design. We had many different silos. The buyer experience of our products was so fragmented. We got a lot of complaints about, you know, just even during the sales process of how they often have to repeat their business problem to different salespeople and then repeat it again to implementation people. Anyway, certainly it was something that I wanted to see succeed as a project. But as someone leading design at that organization, you know, I struggled because you know, do I pull my designers off of product delivery to work on something that I know could be a huge impact for the business? It would be a very hard argument to make, because there goes your down revenue and our commitments for the next quarter. And I thought about this, and I was like, you know, and just speaking off the cuff, you know, as someone that leads design, I think for that project to succeed, designers would have to exist outside of my organization. Ideally, in my dream world, they would be reporting to the SVP. And if he had fluency in design, he would be fixing his business with service designers and deploying them across the org in this way. And I really think just where product design sits, it's one of those silos. So in my mind, that would be an interesting experiment. You know, as much as I love to build a design culture, I think for service design to succeed today, it would have to exist at an executive level to make the impact that we want to see, at least in my organization.
Do you have any more questions, Jod? I've asked the first one. Happy for you to keep it going. Or Krisztian, you can jump in as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. Actually, I was going to go back to your original question because which was related obviously to where service design should sit within an organization. And it kind of reminded me actually of Amy's presentation, because I think the difficulty in answering this question actually lies in the points that Amy highlighted, which is that all of us have different mental models of how service design and product relate to each other. And when I was engaging with that article and listening to you, Amy, it reminded me of an observation I've made a couple of years ago about a kind of different lens of how service design is often perceived maybe by the people who exercise it or just use it every day. And I remember I made this observation, I think, back in a couple of years ago at one of the service design global conferences in Berlin, which was the first time I came across other people from completely different cultures practicing service design. And maybe I'm completely wrong, but I think there's two big approaches to service design. One is kind of the process-led, and the other is the customer-led, the customer experience-led. And I think there are many people who are really passionate about teasing out the processes, getting right what inputs are in the background, almost like leaning into the blueprint aspect, which kind of tries to make this manufacturing line more efficient, that creates the final experience. But in my understanding, is a little bit more akin to the product mindset, which is that we are optimizing inputs and trying to figure out which departments and how they need to work in sync in order to deliver something. And then the other mindset, which is how can we create an amazing customer experience and what the touch points will look like and what the journey looks like and all these kind of things. And I think whether you have one of the other mindsets will influence how you see your own role and position within the organization. So I don't think there is a singular good answer to this. It will always come down not just to the nature of the organization, but to the nature of the people as well in the organization and their origins when it comes to service design, where they started picking up service design, what was kind of the fundamental understanding they had about service design in the first place that they will carry through their career across all the companies that they work at. So that's just my 2 cents.
Any further questions from Krisztian or Jod yourself from the authors that you've heard speak, or any of the authors want to make comments on what they've heard their fellow authors saying before we start to take some questions from the audience?
I have a question for Andy.
Go on, Jod.
So I really enjoyed your comments, Andy. In today's kind of fear-based work culture, with rounds of massive layoffs, what would a successful counterculture look like, and how would you advise human-centered champions to prevail over where I sit? I see a mindset of people that just want to keep their job.
Yeah, and I don't want to minimize that, because I think there is a context and situation matter, right? I have always been someone who has sometimes played a sort of court jester role of kind of generally terrible dad jokes and that kind of stuff to leadership. And it's sort of happened by accident. It's just kind of how I am. But I think sometimes that's allowed me to kind of question something, like the court jester was there to kind of question the king and not get his head chopped off. And sort of keep the king honest, and many a true word is said in jest, right? That idea. On the other hand, I'm really, really aware that I'm now middle-aged, but I'm a white male, middle class and everything. I've got every privilege afforded to me, so it's been easy for me, and I don't think it's very easy often for other people. And it behooves all the other kind of middle-aged white males to actually step up and be good allies in that space too. I think, though, one of the things I've found is very useful, I just wrote it in the chat actually, is asking questions. Right? Asking questions is a really powerful way of managing upward and sideways, Because instead of trying to go into battle and go, you're wrong, and you're, and have just this opinion against opinion thing. I made a little video about this. Sorry if I'm repeating myself, if you've seen it. But when you ask a question, you go, well, on what basis are we, my favorite ones, what's our intent behind this, right? Or, what are the outcomes we're after? And that takes you away from the focus on the thing, the feature or whatever, and actually gets people to think about it. If you ask, on what basis are we deciding to build this thing, and then it forces or something like on what basis are we making decisions? What it does is it forces the person who you're kind of interacting with to actually do the thinking they should have done. Right? And they might have already done it, in which case they'll tell you, and you can have a conversation about that, rather than just being, I've said do this thing, so just do this thing. It's not particularly offensive to ask those questions. It's particularly if you get the tone of it right. You're really kind of asking, you're actually sort of asking a useful question. If they haven't done that thinking, then they have to go away and do it. And what you really do is you sort of put it back on their plate to actually do that work. And I found that's really useful. And I think that's a kind of thing that when we're thinking on a service design approach, you might say, so, and you're on a feature team or you're looking at a particular feature or kind of product, to ask, where are people coming from when they actually are starting to use this particular touch point or this feature, and where do they go afterwards? And if every feature team does this or product team does this, you get that sort of overlap starting to kind of happen, and so things can become more seamless. And that's a kind of simple question to get those teams to ask as well. And I think that's quite a good way of agitating. What I have found is the more you ask that question, people start to sort of police themselves and take it on. So in a conversation, people to start to say things like, and I know Andy's going to ask this, so the reason why we're doing this is so and so, in which case you've started to make that cultural change. And I think it can be a way of kind of, I don't want to say forcing change, but it can be a way of creating change that is not that dangerous for you, because asking questions is always a useful thing. I'll let Mariah answer.
Thanks. Yeah, something just occurred to me where I wanted to kind of build on what you were saying there, which is how service design can be a part of the counterculture to maybe the more industrial version of product management, which tries to consider departments and people and roles as modular, as playing one part of a system. And I think by bringing people together to show them the context in which their work provides meaning, and then find that meaning in the work that they do and get better visibility into how that adds into the whole, I think is a cultural force that service design can start to push towards, that can kind of like culturally undermine that system of seeing people and roles and the jobs that we're doing as being modular and replaceable. So there's my 2 cents.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I just build on that? Because I think there is a common theme across the articles I read, and I think across all the presentations here today as well, which is the language that we use. And I think so often the language that we use diverge quite a lot across people. And even if we use the same language, we mean different things by that. And I think that's a fascinating thing that I come across quite a lot. And I think if I just go back to Amy's presentation, your suggestion at the very end was, if I'm correct, that it should be product and service people together defining what product and service means in this specific organizational context. And my provocative question, doesn't leaving the definition of these 2 things to service and design and product people risk creating their own word for themselves? So just referring back to Andy's point about words create words, if we let these people to use their own words, won't that create a word siloed within those 2 departments? And then you almost like exclude marketing people who would then need to market these products and services. You exclude maybe salespeople who will need to sell this. You exclude the leadership who might have a vision of themselves. But then obviously involving all these different stakeholders would mean that you will have a large table with lots of completely different point of views, and you will not land on any single definition. So this is more of a provocative question, but I'm just curious either about your thoughts, Amy, Andy, anyone else.
Sure, yeah. So I can tell you in our organisation, although it was primarily driven by the UCD team, which includes product designers, service designers, content designers, user researchers, a bit of a suite. We also have in our particular organisation enterprise architects, business analysts, loads of different disciplines who all take a vested interest in the definition. So we haven't just done it, and we're not just going to approach it in silo in our own team. To the point, I think you can start with your product and service designers, but I absolutely agree that when we're talking about defining something in an organizational context, we shouldn't, in my opinion, silo that, like you say, to those two teams, because it's not just us that use those definitions. We're also going to have the conversations with the wider business, the humans, when we're talking about this stuff. So it's really important that it aligns to them. And then there's the other side of things, like I say, enterprise architects, business analysts, UCD, the technologists, developers, people that, the managers, all of these different people need to understand. And it's helpful to align and get this consistent terminology at least. It's a bit of an ambition, I think, because you're always going to get the different in perceptions. But I think at least if you have product and service who use them the most, at least using similar definitions in the stuff that we produce, the way that we talk, those connections that we have with other staff members, humans we work with, then it's setting a good example that hopefully filters out to the wider organisation.
Okay. Go.
Have we got time? We've got time to build on it,
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So at one level, I think exactly what Amy just said, right? That you actually do need to get everyone in the organisation involved. Right? That's the whole point of alignment. And I think one metaphor to use there is a kind of fleet of ships, right? Instead of everything's on a kind of a conveyor belt or a train tracks. Those you have big heavy things that take a long time to maneuver, like an aircraft carrier or a tanker, and you have smaller ships that can kind of dot around, and some things that can scout forward and so forth. But they're all kind of roughly going in the same direction, but they're not all sort of going exactly at the same pace at the same time. And one of the skills that I think designers forget all the time is our ability to make abstract ideas tangible. Right? And that is, we can sketch a thing that some people are talking about, and whether that's a diagram or it's a kind of blueprint or it's a prototype or something like that, it's incredibly powerful because you get past the language problem of people talking apples and oranges. And the fact that you can kind of make a tangible thing and show it to people and everyone go, oh, now I see that. No, that's not what I meant at all. It's enormously powerful. And I've seen time and time again, the whole thing about blueprints is not really the thing itself, right? It's the conversation that happens in front of it. And it's often the first time in an organization where the whole organization's actually seen a visual representation of how the stuff comes together. And that's a really, really, really powerful tool. And, it's much more than kind of anything else is what it does to the conversation. And I think, that's one of the things that we can really use those things for is aligning people. It all starts to fall apart when people start talking about ownership. And I kind of just hate this expression. And it sort of creeps in, and it's a language thing a bit. But when someone feels like they own a part of a service or a product, it automatically sets up a kind of tension there that you have to spend quite a lot of time trying to break down again, or sort of prise it out of someone's hands. And that all comes back to understanding that, to the fear question, actually, fear and anxiety is pervasive in the workplace. I think it's awful that it is, but right now it's terribly so. But people talk about, I survived corporate life, and no one kind of blinks an eye and thinks about, isn't that terrible that that's an accepted kind of normalized thing to say? And in general, stakeholders and all of us in the world of work are afraid and anxious. And if you can work out what people are afraid and anxious about, you can actually really kind of switch that around and think, oh, how can I take some of that fear and anxiety away? And when you do that, you actually kind of open up people's vulnerability actually to be more open to collaboration. And one of the things you can kind of do as a designer is, like I said, is to make tangible, abstract ideas tangible, because that actually gives you a chance to be two people side by side looking at a third thing and talking about it, rather than two people face to face having an argument about an idea and that you'll never resolve, because it's always going to remain in people's heads.
Well, I'd like to move now a little to some of the audience questions, and I know there's been some chat going on, but I'd like to take one question and open it back to you all. And that was Anna Maria Roxana, who talked about the experience of working with a product manager. And if I read between the lines, and Maria, this was someone you were reporting to, but anyway, this person had, as I understand it, wanted to take over the process of doing some things that we typically consider service design activities, journey mapping, for example. But she was feeling like that person wasn't doing it properly and was struggling to either own the process or influence the process. So I guess the wider question is, if we've got success as service designers introducing some of our techniques, our way of thinking within the teams we work, is it a success when everyone's doing it and it moves out of our control? Or how do we keep control or guide service design activities when we have the luck, let's say, of them being really widely established in going beyond our own direct control? Anyone, please feel free to help.
I'll jump in on something. I think that role and title mean less than somebody's experience with the discipline or like being in the right mindset to practice that discipline. I do think with that a specific example around creating a journey map, just because we're digging so much into journey management right now, that is a place that can be really hard if there's not one single person kind of curating what goes into that. What happens a lot is that across an organization, you have 10 different departments mapping journeys in different ways, using different language for things that mean the same thing, or it can get a little bit out of control, and then the things you're working with aren't as useful. So I think like with that, if the fact that it was around a journey map itself is the issue, that's definitely something to kind of be on top of, because having the shared language that's across journeys that happen across an organization is a really key thing to keep I don't know, some level of control over when you're attempting to use that to see a bigger picture.
I love that you use the word curating there, because I think it's a kind of really important thing. That idea that you're sort of caretaking something, there's a taxonomy that you want to, if anyone's done any research and people just ad hoc add tags into the kind of research, if you don't agree about that stuff up front, it becomes just useless later on. And I really like that idea of, it's not about someone owning or controlling something. It's actually making sure this is still a usable thing. And that's the sort of intent behind it. And if you can express that, I think it becomes less, it feels less like a kind of land grab. And that's then what kind of sets people's hackles up, and they try and grab onto it a bit more. The curation's a nice way of thinking about it.
So maybe another question from myself, but I see it coming back in some of the discussion going on, and I'm going to hopefully get a quick answer from each of you, but I don't know who I'm going to put on the spot and ask first. I imagine in the audience today, we've got a lot of service designers working in product-led organizations. I would hope that there are product designers in here listening to all this service design knowledge and becoming educated and converting a bit to our way of thinking. But for the service designers in the audience, what is the single most effective way you think they can build their mandate and get an understanding in the organization for either what they do or what they're capable of? So as a quick answer, what's one thing that someone in the audience can do working as a service designer who needs to build their mandate starting tomorrow? And Mariah, you're still on my screen, so if I could.
Sure. I would say figure out who you want to influence, target a person who's maybe in a role that has the power to give you more influence, and figure out exactly what they are anxious, as someone mentioned, and concerned about and scared of, and exactly how service design can help them, and then do that and help them.
I'll let you. Andy, do you feel like?
I was going to say what Mariah said. I don't need to mansplain it back.
Jod or Krisztian? Any quick tip for a service designer?
I could think couldn't have been said better. I hate to be redundant.
See, Amy's hand is raised.
I was going to say exactly the same, but I will add on to it. So I think the relationship element of what we do is so important, and building those really valuable relationships with people across the organization outside of the UCD practice is really important. And one practical thing to do is find 5 people, set up a coffee catch up with them, hopefully not on the desk, not on the phone, hopefully somewhere you can go, maybe for a walk, have a chat with them, make it more casual, learn about them as a person. So instead of going in with the mindset of trying to sell them UCD or service design, just exactly like you said before, work out what they need and go that way, build relationships, network. It's powerful.
So sorry to jump in. I couldn't find the button for raising the hand. So
Go on, Marcy.
barge in very goodly. Again, I think I have a bit of a different experience because for us, what really worked, what we are trying to make work is really, well, of course, talking to the people, getting that, but also I think that do not underestimate the complexity of bringing this solution to life, because I think that that's also related to what was discussed earlier about giving up your baby forward to see it come, and well, you lose the control at some point. You take ownership of only a part of it, and then God knows what's going to happen. At least this is my experience. So trying to actually have setting up the team with a proper mandate. We don't have a lot of projects where we know, like, oh, let's do that, let's talk to this person and see that. But it's more like, and that's the merge of these two that we are trying to really use, which is, well, there is a mandate for something, there is a OKR that you have to deliver on, and then we can actually build on that, and then start setting up the team with the different capacities that will ensure that this thing will be as perverted as little as possible in the course of implementation.
I think my 2 cents, I completely agree with Maurice, and also I would just build on Maria's points, because I think anxiety is a huge issue. The larger the organization, probably the more it is. And I think a way to really kind of address anxiety is to ask the right questions. And I think it has been mentioned so many times, like asking the good questions is incredibly important. My only build is, I think your goal with asking questions should be to find out what causes ambiguity. Like, what's the reason there's an ambiguity about something? What is ambiguous in the environment, in the goals, in the strategy, in the KPIs, in the techniques? Because I think us, people with a service designer background, sometimes can sound a little bit ambiguous. I think for outsiders, we throw around lots of terminology that might mean absolutely nothing to people. And I think just digging deeper into what is it, the thing that the other person might not really understand, that might come across as a little bit fluffy even, what's causing ambiguity, I think is definitely helpful to build rapport.
Thanks. Any last comments from any of the authors or editors before we wrap up? I should say, David, you put a good showing success. I think that's always a great evidence for what the value of service design, being able to point to work where it's worked well. That was a comment in the chat.
I have one more, sorry. I think also in terms of your storytelling of what you do, like thinking about the language you're using, that it's targeted towards who you're trying to influence as well. And part of that is probably talking directly to the KPIs and objectives and the like metrics that you're making a difference on as well, and using that kind of business oriented language and as part of your demonstration and story.
Great. Okay, we're just coming up to the bottom of our hour and a half together, so we should wrap things up. Thank you very much to all of the authors. Some, of course, were not here present, even as co-authors, from whom you've spoken to or whom you've heard speaking, and of course many authors who weren't even on the stage today, and as well as a guest editor that wasn't here today. Touchpoint is coming out 3 times a year. It's a benefit of membership to the SDN. So if you're not a member, I would strongly encourage you to join it, and you get access to 3 Touchpoints a year. Of course, without being a member, you can still purchase Touchpoint online in PDF form or in print. There is the link in the chat if you'd like to find that as well. We are currently working on the next issue of Touchpoint, which is on service design for equitable experiences. We've had a great turnout to the call for papers, and authors are now working on that as well, and we expect to publish it in the next few months. I'd like also give a shout out to Carolina, who's been quiet in this call, but she's really the magic behind Touchpoint getting produced at the SDN. So as editors and authors, you'll have communicated with her a lot as well. Thank you again for being part of this. Don't forget about our other activities, such as the global conference coming up at the end of this year in Dallas. We're selling tickets with an early bird discount as well. And I hope to see you the next time we run one of these events in a couple months. Thank you. Goodbye.